Hello and welcome to the Rugby Base podcast. I'm your host Jonathan and let's dive into some rugby. It's an exciting podcast today because it's the start of the international season for the Southern Hemisphere teams. The Six Nations was completed a few months ago, with Ireland being much better than the rest. Let's be honest, they only really sweated against the French at the beginning of the Six Nations. They're in a really good spot right now. But let's look at the 5 topics I'm going to be previewing today. New Zealand versus France, Australia versus Ireland, South Africa versus England, Wales versus Argentina, and then finally I'm going to touch on Siya Kolisi being named the first African captain of the Springboks. I think it's a very important topic. I'm not going to talk about what you think I'm going to talk about. I feel like it's an opinion that needs to be shared because I feel like, without getting too deep into it right now, I feel like Siya Kolisi is being unfairly propped up as something that he's not, and I'm going to go to bat for him because I think he's a really good idea for captaincy. But more on that later. Let's start by previewing New Zealand versus France. This fixture has always been sort of painted one way, and it's always been that way since probably when they beat the All Blacks in '94 at Eden Park. Ever since then, there's sort of been a reputation that the French are the All Blacks bunny. Like, if there's a team that's going to upset the apple cart against the All Blacks when they're least expected, it's going to be France. And for a time, it was really, really true. Like, let's be honest here, semi-final '99, that French side just pulled an absolute rabbit out of the hat. It was amazing. It was an amazing game to watch. And they completely destroyed New Zealand, who were the favourite to win that World Cup. And they did the same thing in 2007. Bit of controversy in 2007. It was a forward pass, but it doesn't matter. They still did it. And then this sort of reputation is just sort of been ongoing in the media. Every time New Zealand comes up against the French, it's like, oh, watch out. That's the banana peel. They're going to slip on it. I'm tired of this narrative. I do not think that they are the bunny anymore. If you just delve into when the last time the French actually beat the All Blacks, it was all the way back in 2009. Things were very different in 2009 in the rugby world. I don't know why the narrative still plays. They played each other twice at the 2011 World Cup. The last time the game was actually close was the final of the 2011 World Cup. That's the last time it's been close between New Zealand and France. That was 7 years ago. New Zealand have beaten them, I think, 7 times since then, not once being close. Let's stop calling France the All Blacks bunny. They just aren't anymore. It's a boring narrative, and journalists just inject it every single time they play just to give some sort of excitement to it. It's not exciting anymore. No one's expecting the French to roll New Zealand. It's over. That period of history is done. It was fun while it lasted. This All Black side is different. They do not fall over to teams that are mediocre. It's been shown time and time again. Anyway, France also only won 2 of its games in the Six Nations this year. They finished 4th above England and Italy. It's not really up for debate that this French team is rather average. They are not great at all. And we're saying this on the backdrop of the fact that New Zealand don't even have 2 of their best players on the field. It's crazy to say this, but any other team in the world, if we were saying, if you took Kieran Reid and Brodie Retallick out of, let's say, any other international rugby, you'd say that they're at quite a deficit and talent-wise. Like, how are you going to replace that talent? But this is New Zealand. We all know that New Zealand just has a conveyor belt of just talent coming out of their Super Rugby teams. And, Kieran Reid is not only the best player in his position, but he's an excellent leader on and off the field. Brodie Retallick may be the best player on the planet at the moment. And I'm not even exaggerating. He's an absolute physical beast. He reminds me of Bucky Sporter in the tackle, in the hit-ups when he's a ball carrier. He's just an absolute monster physically. But then he has that physicality. But then he's also got the all-round game of someone like Paul O'Connell. He's just a different animal in terms of he brings 2 sides of what would be considered great locks from the last generation of players. But he's both of them together. And that's scary. And these 2 players aren't in the All Blacks side this weekend to play France, and I don't even care. They are still going to roll them. This game is going to be one-sided. I do not see the All Blacks losing this. In fact, I see them winning by 15 or more points, and I think I'm being generous to France when I say 15 points. There's other people that are predicting this to be over 20, but that's my preview of that game. All right, on to the next game. Following the New Zealand-France game, it will be Australia versus Ireland in Brisbane. This matchup is far more interesting to me as a neutral. Australia has been absolutely woeful the past 2 years in international rugby. They've been completely inconsistent. They beat the All Blacks last year. Good job, well done. Not many people get to do that. But they also suffered thrashings by the All Blacks, England and Scotland, and it's really put a dent into Michael Checker's resume as the coach of the Wallabies since he led them to the final in the 2015 World Cup. This team has not been very good. And when you put them up against a team like Ireland are actually coming off probably their best form in a long time. They thrashed South Africa in Ireland last year. They really waltzed through the Six Nations. They only had a small little scare against France where they needed a drop goal at the end to steal the game from France. But the rest of it, they just waltzed through. And they are just a tactically astute side. They have an identity. They know what they want to do every time they step out onto a rugby field. The Wallabies, we don't know what they want to do. A lot of the time in the past 2 years, you can get the Wallabies to play your game. They don't have a game identity as such. And so this is what makes it very difficult to predict what the Wallabies are going to do, because I'm one of those people who believes that on their day, the Wallabies can beat anyone. And they've shown that. They beat the All Blacks last year. But they're so inconsistent and they are so easy to manipulate tactically. It doesn't take long if your side knows what it's about, and this Irish side does, and it shows in the selections that Checker has made. He knows that the Irish are going to kick it, so he's picked Dane Haylett-Petty to play on the wing to complement Folau. He is allowing, by this selection, he's allowing Ireland to dictate the game to him. In saying that, I don't mind this. I've always found the Wallabies of late to be trying too hard to play an attacking game that mimics the All Blacks when they don't have the personnel to do it. Or at least they don't have the personnel to do it against the world's best sides, and they generally fall into a trap where they don't end up bossing proceedings, and then, as I said, they end up playing to the game that the opposition is playing to them, whereas you'd rather be adaptable to your opposition game before you start playing. You don't want to adapt to it when you're on the field, because you haven't practiced it over in training and all that sort of thing. And so by picking Dane Haylett-Petty on the wing, they now have two people that are very good under the high ball, and I suspect Ireland are going to kick it a lot. So I think this is a really, really good pick by Checker. Some of his selections in the past have been to reward players that show attacking prowess at Super Rugby level. So any player that would score loads of tries, get loads of line breaks and stuff like that at Super Rugby level would generally make it into the Wallabies side, because the Wallabies always want to be attacking, because they sort of have this issue where if they kick the ball too much, they get perceived as boring. And because Australian rugby is not the top sport in the country, a lot of people would rather watch AFL or rugby league. This makes the Wallabies a bit trapped. They can't be who they want to be. So they always picked players that were super attacking, but always had defensive deficits. And so believing our players like Henry Spate, though, this time round, Checker has shown that he's no longer going to continue. He's not, the next player I'm going to talk about is going to show that he still has this issue, but by dropping Spate and not picking him, he is showing that he's no longer going to reward players just for attacking brilliance at Super Rugby level, because it just doesn't. It's not practical at the international level. But that moves me on to that next selection point. He's selected Karevi at centre, and if I was Ireland and I saw that name on the team sheet wearing the 13, I would be licking my lips. This guy is the worst defender at 13 that I have seen in a long time in international rugby. This is someone who he's missed 46 tackles in Super Rugby this year. 46. That is the highest number of any centre in Super Rugby. We're talking about players that play for the Sunwolves have less missed tackles than Karevi does. And this is not to say that he's a bad rugby player. He's obviously a very good attacking rugby player. He's an absolute beast. He's heavy. He's an absolute line buster with pace to burn. But all that's really nothing if he can't tackle, because he plays 13. This is the most defensive. This is the most important defensive position in the back line, and he's the worst tackler, and he's got the worst decision-making of the entire back line to play there. So if I was Ireland, I'd be sending people right down that way. People don't like to hear this because they want, they want the player that's super attacking and all that sort of thing. But there's a reason why Conrad Smith was the 13 for the All Blacks for so long, because he was a really, really good defender. He was smart. His decision-making at game pace was probably the best at 13 that I've ever seen. But Karevi has none of that. And so I don't understand the selection. The first time he got put in the 13, the All Blacks shredded the Wallabies defense in Sydney, and they ran down his channel all the time. He is just a bad tackler, and it's one of the biggest issues with Wallaby team selections, as I was pointing out in my previous point about Henry Spate, is that they love to pick players that I would call a sexy rugby players, the sexy choice. Let's pick the guy who can just absolutely bust tackles, open up the game, can run hard, score tries, and it's all well and good, in theory, to pick on that basis. But at international rugby, I don't think that enough emphasis is put on why tackling and defense is so important to international rugby, because you've got coaches that have got nothing but time on their hands to watch players on film all day, every day, until the international season starts, to find out individual weaknesses. Like, we're not talking about coaches who are actually coaching a team on a week in, week out basis. We're talking about guys who only get to spend a certain amount of time every year training and in camp as an international side. So what do they do the rest of the time? They're watching film. Trust me, that's all they're doing. They're watching film. They're trying to find out what weaknesses their players have and also what weaknesses others do. So you can bet you that Karevi is going to get absolutely targeted in this game. And I just don't understand the selection. I think Czech has got to be smarter than this. Karevi cannot be the 13 that starts for the Wallabies at next year's World Cup, unless he has some sort of miraculous turn of events in how he defends. He can't be. He's going to get targeted, and it's going to be ugly. So it's hard to tell. And with these points, I'm not trying to bash Australian rugby. I'm actually quite impressed by the squad overall, outside of the Karevi selection, of what Czech is doing, because we don't know what the Wallabies are 15 months out from this World Cup. These selections are not being consistent, but after the last 2 years, Czech can't be consistent with the selections because the team have just been bad by their standards. They should be a better team. So we don't know what the Wallabies are going to look like in 15 months' time. They need to beat Ireland in the series, first of all, to show that they can be anything, because Ireland are a very, very good team. And going into this series, I think Ireland are favourites. I think Ireland are going to win this game. But I think it may be by 3 to 5 points. They are playing in Brisbane. The Wallabies always get up in Brisbane. So I think it's going to be an interesting game. I think it probably, outside of me being a South African fan wanting to watch the Springboks England game, I think this is going to be the game to watch, because there's such a backstory to how bad the Wallabies have been the last 2 years, how good Ireland have been the past 18 months. And I think it's all going to converge on the field, because I don't think the Wallabies are out of this series at all. I think that the Wallabies could very easily end up beating Ireland in the series if they play to their strengths. But I think that Ireland are going to win it because they know their strengths better than the Wallabies do. Right, well, we're on to one of the other really interesting games this weekend, South Africa versus England at Ellis Park. And after questioning Australia about where are you 15 months out from a World Cup, we have two teams here that are they just need that question asked about them as well. I mean, England have been completely Jekyll and Hyde since Eddie Jones started. His first Six Nations in charge of England was nothing short of stellar. They only lost one game, they won the Six Nations, and this England side was really shaping up to be something quite strong and really good. They thrashed South Africa and Australia on the end of your spring tours last year, and just absolutely just went to town. They looked like this team was really coming to being on the same level as the All Blacks. They never played the All Blacks in that time span, though. But things have changed quite dramatically since the start of the year. They went from Six Nation champions to being only a cellar dweller because, well, Italy is always the cellar dweller of the Six Nations. But England came 5th in the Six Nations this year with mostly the same team and Eddie Jones as coach. Now, that's pretty bad considering in 15 months' time we have a World Cup. They also lost to the Barbarians. They let the Barbarians score 46 points on them, which is just unreal how they let that happen. And a lot of people point to the fact, it's not really a proper fixture and all that, but most teams don't lose to the Barbarians. Like, you usually are a bit more tactically cohesive than a team of internationals that have just been thrown together to practice for a week and play against you. This England team, this might seem unfair that we're questioning. They were so good for a 12-month period. Now they've just had a sort of like a bad streak. It isn't unfair to ask these questions of the England team because we're 15 months out from the World Cup. They need to beat the Springboks in South Africa to change the tide, because right now they might, on a neutral ground, be a better side than South Africa and Australia. But Australia and South Africa could turn the corner this year. They have more rugby in front of them in this calendar year to fix their problems going into next year. They need to beat the side. Like, if they don't win in South Africa, it's going to put some serious questions on what to think of this England team going into 2019. They already have the problem that Scotland and Ireland have both turned a corner up here in the Northern Hemisphere. It's making it difficult to suggest that if they can't go and beat the Southern Hemisphere sides or the Northern Hemisphere sides, where does this England team rank? It's going to be... this is important for England. They need to win in South Africa. South Africa have been like Australia since the 2015 World Cup. They've been absolutely crap. They pushed the All Blacks in that 2015 World Cup semi all the way for 80 minutes, only to lose by 2 points to they went on to be the champions. But ever since then, they've just been absolutely shockingly bad. They've had record thrashings to the All Blacks. They've had underwhelming home draws to the Wallabies. And this has all happened under the tutelage of Coetzee. Thankfully, SA Rugby finally removed him from the post because he was completely inept. It was absolutely unreal how bad of a coach he was. The team lacked an identity on the field, despite the fact that the Lions were performing well at Super Rugby level. As soon as those players were put in a Springbok jersey, they didn't know what they were doing. And I put that all down to Coetzee's lack of guidance as a head coach. He was terrible. Thankfully, that painful coaching regime is now over, and there's more hope now that we have former Springbok Rassie Erasmus in charge. Hope is all well and good, but Rassie has a lot of work to do in 15 months. He's got some talented pieces, and I think this is the thing that was most frustrating about Coetzee, is that he had young talent. There was a team performing in Super Rugby that had players that should have translated better to international rugby than they did. And Rassie's first step to changing the way the Springboks play is he needs to find a way to take the success that teams are having in Super Rugby and the talent that's in Super Rugby into the Springboks and have that success at the Springboks. The way the Lions were playing the last couple of years should have resulted in wins at home against Australia. You should not be drawing against Australia. Australia have not been a great rugby side the past 2 years, just like the Springboks, but we should have been beating the Wallabies in South Africa with the talent that was available in that Lions squad. But we weren't. We drew away from home. We drew at home. We struggled against the Pumas in Argentina. These are all things that should not have been happening that were happening. And these are the things that Rassie Erasmus has to change in this year, or else the Springbok side is going to go nowhere at the next World Cup. The good news is there's talent. There's a larger pool of talented players than was made available to Coetzee. SA Rugby have given Rassie complete free rein to pick whomever he wants to from that are plying their trade in Europe right now. which is really good because that's where most of the South African caps are. So most of the experienced players, your Bismarck du Plessis, your Francois Steyn, your Duan Vermaelen and all that, they're all playing in Europe. The guys with the caps are all there. And if you can get a good grouping of those players with the young talent that is currently playing Super Rugby in South Africa, they can really form a team. And I think in 15 months, they can make a team that can challenge for the World Cup. But it needs to happen now. And Rassie needs to really put his footprint on this team from the get-go against England in South Africa. I'm not putting much stock in the game that the Springboks played last week against Wales. That was just a cash grab by International Rugby. They staged the game there. The Springboks sent a second-string side, as did Wales. Rassie used it as an opportunity to blood some new players just to see what's what, and so did Wales. So I don't really put much stock in that. I think that the real time to start evaluating what the Springbok side is going to look like going forward is against England, and I'm really excited because if I had to watch another season of Siya at the helm, it would have been really depressing. There's hope for the future of Springbok rugby. Rassie Erasmus can turn this around, but he's got a lot of work to do. In this game, the player that I think everyone should keep a watch out for is Nkosi. He's been playing for the Sharks now for a couple of years, and if you've been anyone who's been watching him will know that he's an absolute beast. He almost weighs 100 kilos on the wing, and he's as fast as anyone out there. He's going to be an absolute matchup nightmare for anyone on the outside, and it's going to be interesting to see how often they can get the ball to him on a running start, because he's going to get over the gain line against smaller players. To summarise though, this game is really, really important for both sides. The Springboks have now got a new head coach. They need to now track themselves towards being a side that can compete for the Rugby World Cup, and it starts tomorrow. It starts at Ellis Park. It has to happen now, or else they're going to be woeful next year at the World Cup. There is hope though. Rassie's a good coach. He's had success in Europe before, and he's got players that he can mould into this role. I think that this game is going to be really close. I think it's very important for both teams, but South Africa always gets up at Ellis Park. This is their fortress. I don't see England winning away from home. I think South Africa are going to win this series. I think England might pinch a game. I don't know where it's going to be. It won't be at Ellis Park. I think this game is going to be won by the Springboks by 7 points. So the next game I'm previewing is going to be the Argentina-Wales game in Argentina. And what a difference a year makes for Argentina rugby. Last year, they did not win a game in the Rugby Championship, and that was with South Africa and Australia being so poor. It just didn't cap off a good year for the Argentina team, and this year, things are so different. The Jaguares are lighting up Super Rugby, and that team is practically the Pumas in Super Rugby. It gives big hope for the actual Pumas this year, because they've not just been winning games, they've been winning games by playing fast, attacking, mistake-free rugby, and it really bodes well for the future of this team going into the World Cup next year, because they had discipline issues. They've always made mistakes that have broken the back of the team at crucial moments, and they haven't been doing that in Super Rugby this year. If they can get it to translate to international rugby, watch out. This Argentina side could be going to the semi-finals like it did last time round. So Wales have been average this year, and they should be beatable. This Puma side is pretty much full strength. Wales were middle of the pack when it came to the Six Nations. They weren't very good. They're missing a few key players, and they're also resting a few key players for this game. So the Pumas must be really excited. There is an opportunity to win this game, and to win it well, because Wales clearly are trying to recover players. They're trying to keep themselves intact. And the form that the Jaguares are in versus what Wales have been this year suggests that they should put points on the board and put them on quickly. They aren't making the same mistakes they have in previous years. I think Argentina are going to win this by 15. In saying that, though, Wales could definitely win this. Argentina are always two different sides. One side's going to go out there and blow you away. it could very well turn into the mistake, ill discipline that has haunted them for years. I need to see it at international level. They're doing it at Super Rugby level. They've cut out all that rubbish. They're now playing rugby that is exciting, mistake-free, and they're getting the results. But I need to see it at international level before I completely jump on the bandwagon. I think it's going to happen. I think it's all going to come together against this Welsh side because this Welsh side's been travelling. There's injuries. Players are being rested. I think the Pumas are going to win this one by 15 points. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay, welcome back to the Rugby Base, guys. I'd like to talk to you about this situation regarding Siya Kolisi being made the first African captain of the Springbok rugby team. And I'm just going to say this right now. Congratulations to Siya. I really, really love him as a player on the field. And the fact that he's the first African player to come to that mark, I'm so happy that it's him because I couldn't think of any other person right now who's fit to actually take on the role. But the reason why I'm talking about it is because there's been a lot of chatter about him being Springbok captain, and I'm not too sure why people always bring... There seems to be a division in South African fans of two camps. You've got the people that are always screaming that someone is a political appointment, and then you've got the other side of it, which is screaming, "Oh, transformation." And the thing that really bothers me about this is that it really takes away from who Siya Kolisi is as a person and a player, because it just assumes he's just a tool to be used by SA Rugby or the ANC government to politicise the sport of rugby in the country, and it's just pathetic, and it shouldn't be like that. And I'll start with the people who think he's a political appointment of SA Rugby, because I think they're the worst. They really don't do justice to South African rugby fans because they make a lot of noise and they're really anti-transformation. And I'm not a massive fan of transformation either, but just using Siya Kolisi as the example of someone being a case for transformation is just so wrong. And a lot of people compare it to someone like, say, when Peter de Villiers was made the head coach of the Springboks after Jake White won the World Cup in 2007. I just really hate that comparison because it just does no justice to Siya at all. Peter de Villiers was only a junior Bok coach before he got the job as the Springboks rugby coach. And he was actually quite successful at it. I'm not going to take anything away from Peter in that regard. He should have actually gone on to coach a Super Rugby side after that. That should have been the next step. But people wanted political appointments, and he was put in as coach at the Springboks, and he was actually a moderately successful Springboks coach. I think he has the highest win percentage against the All Blacks of any professional era Springboks coach. So he does have a few things on his resume that's good, but he was also lucky enough to have probably the best Springboks rugby side of the professional era as well. But that's not the point. The point is that he had gaps on his resume. He got the job over Dick Muir, who got a Shark side into the Super Rugby final, hosted in Durban. He got it over Heineke Meyer, who beat Dick Muir with the Blue Bulls in Durban in 2007. Eddie Jones and Jake White. Jake White, the recently World Cup winning coach of the Springboks, whose contract was not renewed. He got the job over those people, and there's no reason why he should ever have gotten the job over those people. Peter de Villiers should have probably filled a spot left by either Dick Muir or Heineke Meyer at the Super Rugby level because of his success with the junior Springboks. But that never happened. And that's why he's a political appointment. For me, Peter de Villiers is the exact example of a political appointment in South African sport. And for me, when people compare him to Siya Kolisi, that's so wrong, because Siya Kolisi he's 26 years old at this point now. And he's probably tread a very traditional rugby path at this point. He grew up poor, but he was given a scholarship to Gray's High School because of his talent. So he came through the system. This is how transformation actually will happen, is when you get players like Siya Kolisi who are talented and they end up going through the old school systems where they're just getting rugby ingrained into them from a very young age. And he's been playing for Western Province and the Stormers now for years. He's got 89 Super Rugby caps. He's 26 years old. He turns 27 later this month. So he's a young player by relative terms.
and he's got 89 Super Rugby caps. This guy is obviously good at what he does on the field. You do not field a person for 89 Super Rugby caps before the age of 30 if you don't think he's good. You'd be hurting your chances otherwise. He's also got almost 30 Springbok caps. So, I mean, he's been in and out of the Springbok side. Granted, he plays at a very competitive position, but last year he was one of the best Springboks that we had on a very dismal year. Behind Malcolm Marx, he was probably the second best player that we had. He scored tries against Argentina. His work rate was phenomenal. And to cap it all off, he's at the end of this Super Rugby season, he will have been captaining the Stormers for 2 years. And to ignore all these facts, like if I hate saying this, but if Siya Kolisi was white, we wouldn't even be having the conversation. We'd be like, yeah, he's been captain for 2 years, 89 Super Rugby caps, almost 30 Springbok caps, yeah, he's been in and out of the side, yeah, he seems like a decent choice for captain, but it's because he's black, he's the first African captain of the Springboks. Oh no, he must be a political appointment. And it brings me to the people who also call for transformation at the same time, because these people don't understand how damaging it is to young men in that locker room to say, well, oh no, you're a political appointment. Whether you're the captain or you're in the locker room because of, oh, well, we need to have a certain number of players of colour in here. So, and you cause friction. And it's so untrue of many of the African players that now play in the Springbok side. It might have been true in the 90s when when they weren't getting into the schools because of apartheid and stuff like that. But now these guys are coming through. These guys, it's been how many years since apartheid ended? These guys are all going through the proper channels and the proper rugby schools. They're doing exactly the same thing as any of the white players are. And so the people calling for transformation are just as damaging to someone like Siya Kolisi as the people who say he's a political appointment, because you don't give him his just due for what he does on the field as a player week in, week out. If you actually watch this guy play, he's not the best player in the world. He's not the best flanker in the world. I don't think he ever will be. But the fact is, he works hard. He sets an example on the field. He's a bloody good athlete. He's strong. He's fast. He gets to that breakdown so quickly. He's got experience. He doesn't get injured. These are all things that when we talk about, if we didn't want to name a player, we just want to say, what is the perfect rugby player? He's got hardworking. He's fast. He's an athlete. He's never injured. These are all things that we would say we want in any sport. But because it's Siya Kolisi and he's African, we have to now add all these different, elements to it, and it's just so wrong. And I'm saying to you, Siya, I'm like one of your best fans, and I love you, man, and I'm so happy that you've got the captaincy, and I hope you keep it after the England series, because you deserve it, Matty. And I hope you go on to have a long, fruitful career with us, the Springboks. I'm rooting for you, buddy.
Thank you for tuning in to this podcast of the Rugby Base. I hope everyone will join in next week when I review all the results from this weekend. Thank you. Bye.